Every year, my family and I travel down through France in the car, usually on some kind of holiday. There's my son, William, my youngest son, who sits in the back, and William is a fidget. He spends most of his time kicking the back of the car seat and driving everybody nuts. Tom, my oldest son, just falls asleep as soon as he gets into the car. My husband, Richard, likes to travel in complete silence. And then there's me, and I sit there. I'm in a world of my own. I'm enjoying the view. I'm enjoying the peace and quiet until the fight breaks out, of course, about the seat kicking. The thing is, I don't think we're that different as a family in a vehicle travelling for a long period of time. And in fact, I'm sure you can think of your own friends and families and colleagues who perhaps display very similar types of behaviours when they're around and about. The thing is, we all adjust our behaviours in order to get some kind of sensory stimulation coming in. And all of us need to adjust those behaviours across the different parts of the day, depending when we need that stimulation. So I'm sure there's some of you who are morning people, who you get up bright and early, but by the end of the day, you're needing a little bit more stimulation to keep you alert, compared with the night owls who are perhaps here, who perhaps need much more stimulation to get out of bed first thing in the morning. The thing is, we all need stimulation, but the big secret is, how do we get the stimulation in? And the thing is, to get information into our brain is challenging. Essentially, our brains are prisoners in our skull. And as a result of that, we rely very heavily on our sensory systems to get that information in. And when I talk about our sensory systems, I'm talking about sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and movement. And when I talk about movement, I'm talking about proprioceptive movement. That's knowing where our limbs are in space. But I'm also talking about what we call vestibular stimulation, which is all about movement and direction, but also about the speed at which we're actually moving. So let's look at each of those senses in a little bit more information. Let's start with sight, probably the most common one to most of us. Through sight, we recognise objects in our environment, we recognise where we are, we recognise faces and expressions from people around us. It's also key for us to recognise brightness and darkness and maybe pick out objects amongst other things, like opening that cutlery drawer and being able to spot the knife in the drawer. The other thing is that we pick up images just on our periphery, so we see things when we're not necessarily actually looking at them. So that is sight. The next sense is hearing, and hearing works alongside sight because it's there to consolidate what we're actually seeing, but it is also picking up things like pitch, volume, and tone. And through that, we can determine maybe whether we're inside or we're outside. Can we hear birdsong? Or can we hear vehicles? But also it's picking up voices, and we're thinking, oh, I recognise that voice, it's so-and-so. And it's also picking up emotions. So when we hear people shouting, it could be because they want our attention, and so they're shouting to get our attention. But it could also be because they're actually quite cross. And then there's touch. And when I talk about touch, I'm talking about sensation, I'm talking about pressure, and I'm talking about hot and cold. And just like the others, we are using our sense of touch to actually work out what's going on in our environment and the objects that we're actually interacting with. But the thing about touch is, whilst we get sensation all the time for the whole of our body, we don't need to be responding to touch all the time. Our brains don't need to spend the whole day going, I've still got my glasses on, yeah, I've still got my glasses on, yep, still there. So when you put your glasses on or your watch strap first thing in the morning, you're aware of it, but then that system just sort of switches off because you don't need to keep thinking about it all the time. And it's only when your watch falls off or you drop your glasses, you suddenly become aware of the fact that that object is actually missing. The next sense, I think, is an interesting one. We often forget this one, our sense of taste. And you've been practicing that just now. The thing about taste is it actually only incorporates 4 areas, and that's of sweet, salt, sour, and bitter. All those other tastes that we talk about, like chocolate or strawberries, are because we're actually smelling it. We're not actually tasting it. And of course, if you've got a cold, then you can't taste things particularly well. And the other thing about putting things in your mouth, of course, is texture. So putting textures in, you might have a strong reaction to that. You might say, ooh, that's slimy, or that's crunchy. So we do respond to textures as well as the taste that we actually have. And then there's my favourite, our sense of smell, really underrated. For example, have you ever noticed how everybody else's house doesn't smell like your house? We use our sense of smell in a very subconscious type of way. We don't think consciously about it. But actually, it's our sense of smell that orientates us to what's going on. Smelling the smell of bacon cooking tells you that maybe it's nearly breakfast time. Or we might actually be influenced by our sense of smell. So, for example, supermarkets will pipe the smell of freshly baked bread and donuts into the front of the supermarket, because they know most people feel really good when they smell freshly baked bread and donuts. And consequently, happy people spend more money. So they want you to spend more money in their supermarket. The other thing about smell is that we use it to manipulate the behaviour of other people. So we all know about using perfumes and aftershaves as our way to try and manipulate people's behaviour. We all know about the Lynx effect. And then finally, there is the movement that I mentioned earlier. So that I talked about proprioception, where your body is in space, but I also talked about vestibular stimulation. And it's these 2 senses that allow us to be able to walk in high heels without falling off, but also to be able to run for the bus and miss other pedestrians on the pavement and lampposts on our way, so we can manipulate ourselves around our environment. But the thing is, all of us do take in these senses, but we all slightly adjust the way we take in that information. And some people actually need a lot more stimulation coming in to respond than others. An eminent occupational therapist by the name of Winnie Dunn actually defined some very distinct characteristics amongst people to describe the way people take in sensory information. She talked about individuals who need lots of information. They need a lot of stimulation before they respond. And in fact, they need to keep that stimulation coming in, because if they don't, they just switch off. And she called these people sensory seekers. She also described another group who were almost like the opposite end of that. And these people she called sensory sensitive or sensory avoiders. And these kind of individuals control the amount of information coming at them. They don't want too much stimulation. They want to control what's coming at them, and they want to be able to stop it whenever they need to. She also described a third type, and that is called low registration. And people who are low registration also need that level of stimulation, like the sensory seekers, but unlike the sensory seekers, they don't actively go out to get it. So they are quite passive. They wait for the sensory information to come at them. So let me give you some examples of what these individuals look like. Let's start with the sensory seekers. That's William, the fidget in the car. A sensory seeker is a thrill seeker. A sensory seeker likes to get lots of stimulation coming in. They'll go out and get it. They won't sit still. They like the noisy alarm clocks, they like having the radio on, they like the spicy foods, and they will be always going out there to try and get that stimulation. Then we've got the sensory sensitive individuals, my husband Richard, controlling everything, needing peace and quiet. He likes a routine. He likes to know exactly what's coming at him. He likes to know what he's going to have for tea this evening. And he likes to control his music. He likes to not have a noisy alarm clock. He likes to control that level of stimulation. And then there's me, the low registration. Me and my son Tom are low registration. So we like the stimulation. We really do thrive on sensory input, but we don't go out there to seek it. So we miss things. I don't notice when people have had their hair done or they've got a new pair of glasses. Completely passes me by. And people will often say of me, I never seem to get stressed. It's not that, it's just I've not noticed the chaos going on around me or the chaos I've left in my wake. So people will process sensory information differently, and we need to be aware of that. But the thing is, we can't actually change other people's sensory profiling patterns. So if you are a sensory seeker, you will always be a sensory seeker. We can't change that. Let me give you some examples of how that can be a challenge. Think of the child in the classroom who is a sensory seeker. They're going to be fidgeting, jumping around, being distracted. Used to have that problem with William, flicking bits of friends at his school, bits of paper at his schoolmates, not being able to sit still. It's no good telling the Williams of this world to sit still, because he can't. If you make him sit still, he will fall asleep. And likewise, if you've got that child who is a sensory sensitive child, they're going to struggle with the classroom environment, because the classroom environment will be too noisy, it will be too distracting. Maybe they might benefit from being in a part of the classroom that is a bit quieter, where they can't be annoyed by the child who's nattering over here, but also in an area where they don't get that visual movement in the periphery of their vision when they're actually working. Basically, the schoolroom environment does not suit every kind of sensory profile. And we see that in our workplaces, don't we? You all know that person who's got that really cluttered desk, bits and pieces everywhere, talks to anybody and everybody, anybody and everyone. And there's you trying to get some work done and they're nattering in your ear. They need that stimulation to stay alert and also that stimulation to keep engaged in their activity. And that's in contrast to that other individual that we all know who has a desk that is completely tidy and everything's in neat, tidy piles. And they need complete peace and quiet in order to work. They probably might be better actually maybe working from home or maybe working in a separate office, because that busy work environment is really not going to work for them. Relationships too. Think about it. If your partner is a sensory seeker, they're the ones who are going to have that really noisy alarm clock in the morning, aren't they? They're the ones who are going to want to have the power shower, the highly scented soaps. They're going to have the radio on loud. But if you are a sensory sensitive individual, that's going to be hard work. So how about just mixing the environment up for them? Get the sensory seeker to take their clothes into the bathroom the night before, and then when they get up, they can go into the bathroom and they can have the radio on, and they can have the power shower on, and they can dance around, whilst their sensory sensitive partner can emerge more peacefully into their morning. Things to think about. Let me go back to the story on the car. After a while, William, who was getting bored, had got some Lego out, and he was fiddling with this Lego, and a bit fell and dropped down the back of the seat. And of course, every time we went round a corner, the bit of Lego ran from one side of the car to the other. And after a while, my husband said, "What on earth is that noise?" I hadn't even noticed it. So the environment is really important. We need to think about how we manipulate our environments or prepare our environments for people who have different types of sensory needs. And consequently, I leave you with a thought. The trouble is, we know that environments don't always meet the needs of people with different sensory processing abilities. When we think about wards, care homes and schools, they tend to be environments that are one size fits all. And what we do know is people with conditions like stroke, dementia, maybe brain injury, they find it difficult to actually adjust and meet their sensory needs. And putting them into these kind of environments can be really challenging for them. And consequently, I would say that a lot of the behaviours and the challenges these individuals face are not because of their sensory processing problems, it's because the environment is not meeting their sensory needs. So I'm going to leave you with one last thought. I want you to think about what kind of sensory person are you? Are you a sensory seeker? Are you a sensory avoider? Or are you like me, don't notice the chaos going on around you? Think about what your sensory needs are. Think about what your routine is like. Speak to your family and your friends about what your needs are in terms of meeting your sensory needs. One day, you're going to need somebody to advocate for you. Thank you.